Welcome you back to this our show, Think Tech Hawaii's Humane Architecture. This happens to be our 231st episode, and you are about to nearing our 15,000 viewer, the exact number you see down there. And we're broadcasting once again with the majority, 2/3 of us back in Honolulu. And one of us is in his Boston, that's Matt Noblett, and DeSoto Brown and myself are back in Honolulu, and we continue to talk about what seems more pressing than in a while about democracy and how people in planet-friendly architecture, now we're down to even in a specific detail, can contribute to that if we're back in a second. Talking democracy, we threw in these two slides, which shows it shattered and endangered. The crazy, sad war of the Ukraine. So do you remember about it? Must almost be a year ago when it started. I was still back in Munich. And then our neighbors that us Germans have so much in common ever since, like back in the 70s, where we got lazy and didn't want to do the dirty work anymore. We got the Turks come over and help us out. And I will never forget when we had our Chris and Siraj, our emerging generation, stop by. And I was going out for dinners with them. And we have some dinners here in Honolulu, but with all respect, they're not quite the same as in Germany, made by the many Turks out there. So anyways, we're talking about the earthquake over there. I think the toll is now close to 40,000 people. Really, really tragic. But what's more tragic about it is these two articles from both our cultures is right, that there are certain people who even make it worse, right? Like the Wagner Group saying, oh, this might drag on forever or for 6 years, as they say here. Well, they might have a dirty, nasty interest in that one. And autocrat Erdogan is not really helping or hasn't been helping to keep this, as limited as it could have been, because it's more than just a natural disaster, because he was in a corrupt way, keeping himself and others away from having, buildings become more resilient and resistant to that. So that's all the nasty, dirty, dark stuff behind that is anti-democratic. And also talking anniversaries, maybe, or commemorations. There was just one just a couple days ago that gets us back to our founding fathers of these choke sequences. The Günthers met because both Günthers, Günther Despang, our Günther, and your Günther Behnisch are from Saxony, even around Dresden. And they just had their second birthdays because it was just the anniversary of the bombing, which was in a sort of understood, yet I guess in its extent also to be viewed critical response to what we did in our darkest days to everyone else in the world. And then the revenge of the Allied. And that was just, again, happening as an anniversary some days ago. So talking anniversaries and trying to keep that from continuing to happen gets us to the next slide. This we know DeSoto around several birthdays, and in fact there was yours recently. Congratulations again. Our Tiki Basement experts, Stefan's birthday was also, and some years ago we celebrated mine in here. This location here is where we went, where we celebrated our exotic escapism expert Susanna's birthday, which is also around your guys' birthday. And if we get you guys excited to go there, you can't go these days because the Munich Security Conference, which prides itself to be the main conference and try to keep things safe in the world, it's going to happen there in 2 days for the weekend in the Bayerischer Hof, which in the basement of it is what, DeSoto?
It's the Trader Vic's restaurant. And that is one of the crazier parts of many kooky things that I've learned about Germany, is that they have a branch of this restaurant, which started in Hollywood in the 1930s. And there were two competing of these tiki restaurant chains. Again, they both started in Southern California and spread to various places, including Honolulu, which is crazy. The home of tiki reality was the host to two tiki fantasy restaurants. They're both gone from here, but there's one still functioning in Germany. And in the small picture in the top right, you can see me receiving a copy of the menu from that particular German Trader Vic's, which we did live on the programs a few years ago. And I received it from Suzanne, and I was a very happy and excited man to have this treasure given to me.
So how do we cut the angle back to our stuff? I think it might not be that complicated because, Matt, you and I talked a little bit about our sort of little, tricky howly position that, us coming to paradise in Hawaii, and what do we know and what do we think? But this is a good example, DeSoto. We want to challenge you in thinking, okay, this has all started not in, but around Hawaii and similar places. Then it went somewhere else and got even more crazy over there. And potentially maybe then it all coming back home and coming full circle. So maybe it is like with other architecture like that as well. And we maybe with screens, for example, that we will continue to talk about it. And just before we do that, go to the next slide, because just before I left, I took a chance to show the emerging generation the other piece of zeitgeist, because Trader Vic's in Munich started in '71, and you, DeSoto, for our Dome Honolulu guide, are going to take on one of the chapters that is about the tradition of innovation that you were part of when you grew up in Honolulu. And for Munich, obviously, it must have been these early '70s, because the Trader Vic's they put in the basement of the highest end hotel. And also, we won the bid for the '72 Olympics that Matt, your founding father, Günther, won the competition and basically built it. And also then another firm, Heinlewischer and Partner, which we learned from the exhibit that the TUM University did. And we just missed to visit with the emerging generation by a day or 2 days. But I didn't miss it. Thank you. Didn't. And yeah, I took the guide with them that I show in here as a clamp between several pictures here. So I showed it to them this way. But I took them to, which I learned from the exhibit, that Heinlewischer and Partner, which was a direct commission, but they also got it from because they were finalists in the Olympics competition as one of the justification, I guess. And that, DeSoto, we were talking about this over and over again, and we will continues to be one of the finest examples of people and planet-friendly domestic architecture. And I have to take you, Matt, up on your, I thought it was an offer that you said some people who live in there, because I have never been in, shame on me. So that will be the next step. I know that I think Mr. colleague, our son, I think, lives in there. And then I think Mr. Jocha, who's also professor at TUM from Fink und Jocha, lives in there. Mm-hmm. He was sort of a curator of the guide in that capacity. And obviously, again, we have our fresh Governor Green down there as far as trying to tackle that issue, housing as the most pressing issue. And one sad thing at the top left is what the two projects, or the issue we have here and that project, share, because it is pretty sought after, rightly so. And we show you a unit which has the size of my Waikiki Grand, roughly around 30 square feet, square meter, 300 square feet. And it's roughly in the same number, 300,000 euros / dollar. There isn't much exchange rate these days here. So that's something questionable and problematic on both ends, right?
Well, was this, let me ask you, was this development, when it was constructed, intended to be low cost or more affordable? Or you said it's desirable because of, I assume, its design, but was it supposed to be affordable when it was first built?
Well, I mean, Matt, do you want to chip in on that from your extended knowledge about it?
Oh, about the
The
athletes
housing.
housing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it was originally like all the athletes villages and wherever the Olympics are held. I mean, that was originally built as athletes housing. So it is in principle quite modest. And the idea in the 70s of market rate housing in Munich was not nearly what we consider to be today. I mean, housing has never been as expensive as it is, in Hawaii, for example, or even on the east coast of the States. I suspect the prices now are somewhat more elevated, but and I know people oftentimes will buy two adjacent units and combine them into one. But I wouldn't say necessarily it was. I mean, the other thing is like the idea of affordable housing is a bit different there as well. It's not a people in the middle class will buy into developments like this because it's just seen as a kind of a responsible and fairly efficient way to live.
Yeah. And all the models down there, again, is from that exhibit. So they're by students of the Technical University of Munich for that exhibit. And up there is us at a very frigid early morning about that, not that long ago, 1.5 weeks ago, I took our emerging generation up there, as you can see, as to potentially draw something from it and learn something from that, because it is a prime example for urban, vertical, inclusive, easy breezy, as much as you can get it in Germany. And you got lanais and you got planters, so you can grow your fruits and or at least your herbs, some small vegetables. And that's, as you, DeSoto, and I say, that's what everyone should have here in Honolulu. So it is on the other end of the world, half a
Hmm.
century ago, but still pretty up to date. And
There are a
so,
lot of people. There
mhm,
are a lot of people who think high density mid rise development for housing is really the optimal solution, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can see
And
that.
and next slide, that is, again, we then continue to walk to your guys, Matt, your inaugural firm's, heydays project, the Olympics itself. There is also from the exhibit, the two right pictures there. There's a very poetic sketch by Fry Otto, called "The Clouds," and then there is a very pragmatic little detail tensegrity model at the bottom right. So always oscillating between these two scales of the pragmatic and the poetic, and vice versa. And then bottom left, you can see us, me bundled up there on Zoom and in the cold, and we walked up to the detailing, which is so awesome, still up to these days. And then we ended up, before me, freezing at the top left in the swimming stadium, where I could defreeze, and thanks to an enclosure that it got and an additional PVC membrane. But you see, the tropical plant is surviving in there as a naked, or down to trunks naked swimming people. So there is this little enclave of tropical and exotic. And again, the oscillation between the pragmatic and the poetic, and how technology and systems, in a very clever way, basically improve that. And that gets us back to your project, Matt, and the next slide, and your screens that you developed. And as promised, you telling us more about it. We're also introducing someone who we're going to meet, not in person anymore, unfortunately, but on Zoom. We just decided on the 28th, which we'll have Thomas letting know. And you please introduce your colleague and buddy, Thomas Auer, to us quickly, who you see down there at the bottom right.
Yeah, Thomas Auer is a sort of, I'd say, a longtime collaborator of our office. He is one of the partners at Transsolar Klima Engineering. They do really work. Well, they're at a firm which is a kind of a mix of engineers, mechanical engineers, and climate engineers, but also physicists and process engineers, and people who think very broadly about how building systems and the environment interact. And so we've, I think, basically done probably 98% of our projects over the last 30 years with them. including the one at Harvard where we developed this sun shading system, exterior sun shading system to protect the glass from solar irradiation, which is something that Trend Solar has always felt very strongly is a critical component of building design when you're trying to minimize the amount of energy it takes to make it inhabitable.
Yeah, and I look forward to getting together, and we're talking on many levels, and certainly in his capacity of a partner in Trend Solar, but also being a professor at TUM and some potential, doing things together, hopefully. So walk us a little bit more through the diagram. And before we do, again, we're doing this under the conditions of where you are right now, Boston, which is similar to me 1.5 weeks ago and the majority of my life, and you, DeSoto, as a kid in Boston. This is temperate climate where, yes, we got it cold, where we want to harness the sun as one of our renewable energy sources, but we also want to shy away from it in the summers where it gets just equally hot as here, sometimes hotter. So please explain this to us, because we see the summer sun angles and the winter sun angles and many more things in there. So let us know.
The drawing sort of is trying to show a number of different things. As you mentioned, the angles of the sun are what's driving the development of this screen. With the idea being that in the spring, the summer, and the fall, when the sun is relatively high, those are the times of year that we want to shade the facade. We don't want the sun to hit the facade, because once the solar radiation penetrates the glass, it will heat up on the inside of the building and contribute to the need for more air conditioning. While in the winter, having a little bit of, when the sun angle is very low, having it be able to penetrate through the screen to pre-warm the space behind it is not actually a bad thing. But there's a whole number of other things that are going on relative to the design of the building. There's the fact that all of the glass area is triple glazed, so it's a much more efficient and it loses far less heat than a kind of more traditional double glazed wall. And we're seeing that a lot more as a kind of a standard component in buildings now. In Europe, it's been that way for many years, but is beginning to make a dent here. The screen also, the upper surfaces, the upper horizontal surfaces of the screen shades also reflect daylight into the interior of the building. So you see the note about daylight autonomy. We were very intent on trying to drive daylight as deeply into the floor plate as possible to achieve what's known as daylight autonomy, which is a measure of how many, what percentage of the working hours of a typical day you could function in a space without having the electric lights on. So with this screen and with the additional floor to ceiling height that this building required, we're able to get really good daylight autonomy as deep as 20 feet into the building floor plate, which is quite good. And then the other thing that the screen enables is the method of actually whatever resulting heating and cooling is required for the spaces. We can achieve that using a very simple radiant ceiling panel, in this case of the diagram, which is basically a ceiling made out of metal that has tubing strapped to the back of it, and basically heats up or cools down that ceiling surface, which then re-radiates the heat energy or the lack of heat energy to the building interior. People feel that in the same way that you feel the sun on your face when you go outside, even though it's a million miles away. The important thing with radiant surfaces is the direct visual contact to the surface, not the proximity to the surface, and definitely not the movement of air. So it's a very quiet, very passive, and very low energy way to condition spaces. The last thing I'll mention on here is just the note about natural ventilation. The glass wall behind the screen in each of the rooms that are regularly occupied has an operable window, so that people can just simply walk up to it and turn a little crank to get fresh air into the interior of the building, which is something we also consider pretty much a human right when it comes to building design.
I have two pragmatic questions for you, Matt. The first is, thinking about the IBM building, which has an exterior screen on it as well, one of the really notable things about that is Vladimir Osipov designed it so that birds could not roost on it, and also so that it would not gather debris, which would get caught on the ledges. how does this screen deal with birds and windblown debris?
So the horizontal, or let's say the surfaces that run horizontal, kind of like in the direction parallel to the facade, are all sloped away from the building. And what you find if you deal with the question of birds on building facades is that they really look for fairly horizontal, stable places to perch.
Yes.
And so, I mean, we actually have a consultant who helps us kind of calculate these things, but effectively the geometry of those shades kind of prevents or sort of discourages birds from actually roosting there. And then as far as debris or anything like that, it's really the same answer. I mean, we also did a pretty extensive analysis of snow accumulation on these shades. And again, because of the downward sloping nature of the surfaces, it really basically just sheds snow when it snows. So it's actually fairly benign in terms of some of those kind of secondary, potentially problematic effects.
And I have now the radiant ceilings. How does heat get to those pipes? Is that hot water circulating through them?
It's either hot or cold water, depending on if you're in heating season or cooling season. But exactly right. It's a little 1/2-inch tube that goes from the building system.
Okay. And what about potential leaks from that?
All of the piping is exposed and visible. It's all also tested. And these are, I mean, the piping that's on the back of the ceiling is all copper piping. So they use flexible piping to get to the panels, but copper piping properly soldered and fabricated in a shop is quite reliable, actually.
Right.
The bigger concern with ceiling surfaces like that is condensation. So if you're in a very humid environment, you have to be careful that you don't have the windows open, for example, at a time when the temperature is above the dew point, and you could get, or it could go, if the outside temperature is above the dew point and you have a cold radiant panel surface, you'll get sweating on the panels, which you have to avoid. So the windows are connected; they're interlocked with the panels, so that if the windows open, the panel shuts down, and vice versa.
Oh wow, that's very high tech. I'm very impressed. But and you said that the ceiling panels are metal as well. So if there is a leak, it's not going to be destroying drywall or something like that.
No, nothing like that. And I mean, I've never heard of a catastrophic leak where water's just spewing out of a tube. It would be at joints, obviously, and you would notice that pretty quickly, and it wouldn't really hurt the panels itself unless it went unchecked for a long time.
Right, because I was just thinking, I'm not thinking of a catastrophic flood. I'm thinking of just the things that you mentioned, a minor leak or condensation. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, that's very illuminating. Thank you.
and thanking our producer, Michael, because he was able to bring up the IBM building that you mentioned, you referred it to, which we're going to look at on a little later down the volumes here, but this is a preview so that you, the audience, have an idea what we're talking about. If you're not familiar with, Osipov is the architect of your home building that you grew up in, DeSoto, and he has been doing lots of other buildings on the islands and beyond. And this is his most, flamboyant building in town that has a very iconic appearance, and that also is doing. I always wondered if one would go back and sort of like with whatever software, Ecotech is like the simple, dummy down versus for the emerging generation, and you would really kind of calculate the amount of shading that it actually does, because you can be pretty sure. And there's one thing we always tell everyone, the emerging generations and ourselves. One thing, a one-trick pony, so to speak, screening, detailing is not doing it because the sun, is different on the different sides. So what works to the south doesn't work to the west and the east and the north. So, but you can already see there is a significant amount of sun being kept away by the louvers, and it's then only a sort of a nitpicky, which we don't want to be. At least I don't want to be. Quite does it do that?
I think if it's dense enough, you generally get good shading, everywhere. It may not be as precise as sort of something like we did, but it does still the bulk of the work, and it's fine. The only question I have, I think, isn't this the north facade?
No, this is the. Oh no, I guess it is. I was thinking this is the south.
He did it.
It is the south. It is the south.
He did it all the way around
again.
Yes.
And
But
I think
in
that
his defense, obviously there were no computers then for
you have
anybody to be
defend
able to
it. He's the
determine this thing.
architect.
So yeah, there was no way that to do the calculations that Matt you just described, which we can do now without any problem. When Ossipov designed the building, it was very much less brain power available through machines.
It would be very labor intensive. Yeah. But I mean, it's always this question: if you have a four-sided building and one side doesn't technically need shading, would you not put it there anyway for kind of either aesthetic purposes or something else? But this is probably not due north. I don't exactly know the precise orientation, but
well, it's more that the other side, we know there's the Mackay, the ocean, and that's where the sun sets. So then one of the shorter sides is, I think, the north one, and it's not exactly to the north grid to begin with, as you guys say, but it's one of the shorter sides. Then probably the one pointing to the right, which would be the short, which would be the one. But again, I think you're right. I mean, even in the intuitive method, because there are these horizontal parts that, rightly so, DeSoto, you said for practical reasons they weren't detailed as being horizontal, but slightly slanted, and these basically do the shading for the more southern sun, and then the vertical parts do the shading for the east and the west, the lower sun. So it is very clever, and it is a grandfather and a pioneer that sort of developed a genetic code for screens, what we're talking about, that we have ever since lost, and we need them back. And maybe just like with a tiki, again, started around here, moved away, and maybe has to come back.
Needs to come back.
And then it might be, the Howley guys who bring it back.
That's
our guest today.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right, so great. Let's continue and let's go more into that and look into the other drawings, because you guys are great in doing multimedia things. We saw computer rendering. We quickly saw hand sketches. We will see real scale demonstration, mock-up animations, testings, and more. So stay excited for that one. Coming starting next week again. And until then, please stay very, very screamingly excited about screens, as we do.
Yes, of course.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching Think Tech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.